They sent me to observe. That was the word the High Command used. Observe. As if what happens inside a human military academy is something you can simply watch, catalog, file under behavioral anomalies, non-hostile, and return home from with your neurological framework intact. I have filed 47 incident reports in 19 rotations. 17 of them I was told to rewrite because High Command did not believe me. I rewrote them. I made them less accurate. They still did not believe me. What follows is my final unedited account, submitted under protest, annotated in places where I feel the record requires my personal clarification, and structured into 3 parts because that is how long it took me to stop questioning my own sensory data and accept that, yes, this is simply what humans do. If you are reading this because I have been removed from my post, I want it noted that I requested reassignment on 4 separate occasions. They sent me back each time. They said I was, and I quote, the only officer we have who can keep up with them. I have never been less proud of anything in my life. I arrived on a Tuesday. I mention this because the humans told me later that a Tuesday arrival already explained a great deal. I did not know what a Tuesday was at the time. I looked it up. It is apparently the second worst day of the week, and nobody agrees on which day holds first place. This is a debate that has been ongoing, unresolved, for the entirety of human recorded history. I should have turned around. The Academy grounds were, I want to be precise here, because my earlier reports were accused of editorializing aggressively beige. Not the calm, instructive beige of a Gelthian administration center. A hostile beige. A beige that had seen things. The buildings were low and wide and spread across a flat patch of continental interior that the humans called a base with a kind of possessive affection I did not understand yet. The air smelled of burning hydrocarbons, synthetic fabric, and something sharp and chemical that I later identified as a cleaning agent they use on their weapons. They clean weapons with it. They also, I was told, sometimes drink it. I filed that under unverified and kept walking. My liaison met me at the gate. Sergeant First Class Dara Okonkwo. She was a compact woman with close-cropped hair, going silver at the temples, and she looked at me the way an experienced veterinarian looks at a dog who has just eaten something off the floor, not alarmed, exactly, but profoundly unsurprised. Sub-Commander, she said, shaking my secondary hand when I extended my primary in the incorrect cultural configuration. Welcome to Fort Halcyon. Do you drink coffee? I was told to try it, I said. My superiors said it would help me understand human cognition. She made a sound. I cannot classify it. Something between pity and respect. They weren't wrong, she said, and handed me a paper cup of something that smelled like scorched earth after rainfall. I drank it. I would like to formally note here in this official document that I drank it voluntarily and without coercion. I would also like to note that whatever it did to my secondary nervous system in the following 20 minutes was not what I was briefed to expect. My superiors described coffee as a mild stimulant. It was not mild. It was architectural. It rearranged something behind my eyes. The world sharpened at all the wrong edges. We start at 0500, Sergeant Okonkwo said. She was already walking. That is, I checked. Before sunrise. That's the point. I followed her. The coffee was doing something to my secondary pulse. I kept pace. The first thing I observed officially was a training exercise designated SEER Fundamentals, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. I had read the course description. I had cross-referenced it with 17 alien military training equivalents. I believed I understood what I would be watching. I was incorrect. What the course description said, trainees will be placed in a controlled environment and expected to apply learned survival techniques under observed stress conditions. What actually happened? They dropped 31 young humans into a forested area the size of a small Gelthian city block, removed most of their equipment, and told them the exercise ended when they stopped a team of instructors from finding them for 48 consecutive hours. I watched this from a monitoring station with Sergeant Okonkwo and 2 very tired-looking junior officers were drinking coffee out of containers so large they qualified, by volume, as personal water reserves. They won't make it, said one of the junior officers. He had a betting pool sheet in front of him. There are 40 names on it. That's the point. said the other one. I looked at the screens. The trainees had been out for 4 hours. 6 were already huddled under what appeared to be an emergency mylar sheet, doing math. On a piece of bark. With a stick. What are they calculating? I asked. Probably instructor patrol patterns, Sergeant Okonkwo said, not looking up from her own paperwork. They've had access to instructor patrol patterns for 4 hours, I said. They've been in the field for 4 hours. They were dropped into the field immediately and have been running calculations since. Welcome to Fort Halcyon, she said. I watched trainee specialist Marcus Webb for most of the first cycle because he was the easiest to track. He was taller than the others by approximately 15 centimeters, which in retrospect was an identification advantage and a tactical disadvantage, which he apparently understood because within 6 hours of insertion, he had built what I can only describe as a mobile concealment platform out of sticks, netting, and the kind of creative desperation that in most species signals a breakdown, and, in humans, apparently signals Thursday. He wore it. He wore a bush. He walked around as a bush. Not a convincing bush. A bush that was clearly a human in a bush. But he had clearly decided that functionally convincing and visually convincing were different problems, and he was only interested in solving one of them. I flagged this for my report. Sergeant Okonkwo looked at my flag. She crossed it out. That's just camouflage, she said. He built it from garbage, I said. Yes. In the dark. The good ones do it faster. Istir de hair. She went back to her paperwork. I went back to my screen. Trainee Webb had stopped moving. He was now lying face down in a stream bed in his garbage bush, letting the water flow over the back of his ankles. The instructors walked 8 meters past him. One of them stopped, looked at the stream, looked at the bush-shaped mound in the stream, looked away. The instructor walked on. I sat with that for a moment. Does the bush have a name? I asked eventually. One of the junior officers looked up from his bet sheet. Sir, the bush. Has Trainee Webb named it? There was a pause. They looked at each other. They looked at me. We could ask him, said the other junior officer, in the tone of someone who has decided to lean into the absurd rather than fight it. He'd answer, said Sergeant Okonkwo, from somewhere behind her paperwork. By hour 31, 19 trainees had been found. 12 remained. Webb's team of 5 had not been located. His team of 5 had also somehow been leaving things. Small things. A ration wrapper placed at a specific angle. A stone arrangement that looked accidental until you saw 3 of them on the same bearing. A scuff in mud that pointed left at a fork the instructors were definitely going to take. He's leaving a false trail, I said. Looks like, said Sergeant Okonkwo. But they're moving away from the false trail, I said. He's not just misdirecting. He's creating a pattern of misdirection that implies a direction, which is itself the misdirection. Yep. He built a lie inside a lie out of mud and wrapper material, and Webb's a clever one, she said simply. I noticed around hour 33 that I had been gripping my coffee cup hard enough to deform it. I did not remember tightening my grip. The coffee was cold. I drank it anyway. It had stopped doing architectural things to my nervous system. I had started to feel its absence. This, I later understood, was how it worked. The exercise ended at hour 47 when an instructor with a drone sweep caught Webb's team by thermal signature. They had been in a drainage ditch covered in mud and leaves. Thermal imaging found them anyway. Webb stood up out of the ditch, mud-caked, ankle-deep in water, and looked at the drone for a long moment. Then he clapped slowly. Nice, he said. No sarcasm I could identify. Genuine. The instructor with the drone looked at him. You knew we had thermals? The instructor said. I figured you did, Webb said. I was hoping the mud coat would degrade the signature enough. It almost worked. The instructor stared at him for a moment longer than regulation probably intended. Get out of the ditch, Webb. Yes, Sergeant. He got out of the ditch. He was smiling. I have spent considerable time trying to understand why a person who had spent 47 hours in cold water, under mud, on no sleep, running a deception operation that almost worked would smile at the moment of its failure. I have asked Sergeant Okonkwo about this. She said, because he learned something. I said, he failed. She said, he learned something. I filed this exchange. I was not sure what to do with it. I filed my first official report that evening. In full, unedited. I used the phrase stratified psychological architecture to describe the way trainee Webb processed the gap between anticipated outcome and actual result without apparent distress. High Command sent it back. They asked me to rewrite the section about the bush. They said it was unclear whether I was describing the bush literally or metaphorically. I rewrote it. I made it clearer. They wrote back and said they were sending me coffee. The good kind this time. I did not know there was a good kind. I was beginning to understand that there were a great many things I did not know. I went back to the monitoring station. I got a new cup. I sat down. The next cohort was starting orientation. 38 new humans were sitting in a room listening to an instructor tell them exactly how the next 18 weeks were going to break them. They were taking notes. Every single one of them was taking notes. I pressed record. I want to begin by stating, for the record, that I was not supposed to be inside the simulation. That is the most important context for everything that follows. I was an observer, un non participant observer. This distinction mattered to me quite a lot at the start of Cycle 11. By the end of Cycle 11, it had ceased to matter to anyone, including me, because the distinction had been effectively dissolved by events. The simulation was called OPEX Mirror. I had read the briefing. 3-day joint exercise. One team plays command. One team plays enemy force. The command team issues orders to simulated assets. The enemy force improvises. No live ordnance. Controlled environment. Realistic but bounded, the briefing said. Realistic but bounded. I have since used those words to describe this experience to several of my colleagues. They ask me what I mean. I tell them to look up Trainee Specialist Webb. They go quiet. Webb had been promoted to Trainee Staff Sergeant 2 weeks prior. This was faster than regulation intended. Sergeant Okonkwo had put the paperwork through with a footnote that said, verbatim, "Trust me." High Command, apparently, had learned to. He was now running the enemy force team. Red cell, 11 people, given a 40% smaller operational area, no air assets, reduced logistics, and explicit instructions that their job was simply to make the command team's simulation realistic. Webb had spent the night before the exercise in the planning room. I know this because I was in the monitoring station when he came in at 2300 and did not leave until 0430. I know what he was doing because the cameras were on, and I was awake because the coffee had stopped being something I chose and had become something I maintained, like a second circulatory system. He was reading command team communications intercepts from the last 6 simulations. All of them. 6 simulations of OPEX Mirror. Taking notes. Cross-referencing. Does he have permission to access those? I asked Sergeant Okonkwo. She didn't even look up. They're not classified. They're from previous exercises. Correct. He's using previous exercises to predict. The command team does the same thing, she said. Usually. I wrote that down. I was not sure why. I wrote down a lot of things that cycle that I could not immediately categorize. The notebook was getting full. I had started a second one. The simulation began at 0600. By 0700, the command team was confident. They had established their forward positions, locked in their communications protocols, and activated their simulated air assets. They issued orders in clean, structured language. The kind of language that sounds like a plan. At 0712, Webb's team vanished. Not metaphorically. The tracking grid showed 11 icons. Then 8. Then 3. Then none. The command team's intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed trainee named Featherstone who kept a pencil behind each ear and used them in alternation, which I had stopped questioning, looked at her screen for 20 seconds without moving. "That's not a glitch," she said. "No," said her commanding officer. "They pulled the transponders," she said. "They can do that." Long pause. "They apparently can do that." I wrote this down. I was writing things down very fast at this point. My second notebook was half full. I had borrowed a third from one of the junior officers. He looked at how quickly I was filling it and went to give me a fourth without being asked. This is what 6 weeks at Fort Halcyon does to a person. Webb's team reappeared at 0934. not on the tracking grid. In the command team's logistics corridor. I want to explain how this was possible, and I want to explain it carefully because it is important and because High Command's follow-up inquiry asked me to. The command team had established a logistics corridor, a route for simulated supply movement, along the eastern perimeter of the operational area. It was per doctrine of a low-priority security zone. Corridors are process, not combat. Nobody defends process in a simulation. Webb's team had been in the logistics corridor since 07:15, moving in intervals between surveillance sweeps, using the terrain to break their electromagnetic signature, which, with the transponders pulled, meant there were 11 people walking through a gap in the command team's attention that the command team didn't know existed because the gap was in a place the doctrine said didn't need watching. They came out of the corridor directly into the command team's communications hub. Simulated. All of it. No contact. No engagement. Webb walked up to the communications officer, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, "You're dead." The communications officer said, "What?" Webb said, "We've been behind your line for 2 hours and 19 minutes. Your hub is compromised. You're dead, your comms are dead, and we've been listening." The communications officer turned to his commanding officer. His commanding officer turned to the exercise controller. The exercise controller looked at his board, looked at Webb, looked at his board again. "Exercise pause," he said. He said it very quietly. "I have now watched the footage of the pause 12 times. Not because I was asked to, because I keep thinking I missed something. Some moment where Webb's team made an error that was overlooked in the chaos. Someplace where the seam showed. There wasn't one. What there was instead was a 22-minute argument about whether what Webb's team had done was within the rules of the exercise. I watched this argument from the monitoring station, drinking my 4th coffee of the morning and feeling something I had started to reluctantly identify as a specific kind of exhausted admiration. Like watching someone pick a lock you were told was unpickable. You don't want to be impressed. You are anyway. The argument ended when the exercise controller pulled up the rule document. "Can red cell pull transponders?" someone asked. The controller scrolled. It says blue force transponders cannot be disabled without controller approval. It says nothing about red cell transponders. Silence. "Because they're not supposed to be the ones disabling them," someone said. "I know," said the controller. "They did it to themselves." "I know. They went dark on purpose, so we couldn't find them." "I know." Another silence. Longer. Webb was leaning against the wall of the command hub, drinking water from a canteen. He had the expression of a man who had slept extremely well and eaten a good breakfast. He had done neither. "I had the footage." "Staff Sergeant Webb," the commanding officer said. "Sir, did you find the transponder rule on your own? But did someone tell you?" Webb considered this for a moment that was slightly too long to be casual. "I was reading the previous exercise reports, sir. One of them mentioned a red cell team that was penalized for removing blue force transponders. I wondered if the reverse scenario was addressed. And it wasn't." The commanding officer looked at him for a long time. "Resume exercise," he said finally. "I will spare the full account of the remaining 54 hours. My notes from that period are extensive, and I have attached them as Appendix C through Appendix G. What matters for this report is a condensed version of outcomes. The command team adapted. This is important. I expected them to collapse. They did not collapse. Featherstone, the pencil behind each ear intelligence officer, redesigned her tracking protocol in real time using manual reporting from field units. She had a physical map on a table. She was moving hand-drawn pieces on it. She had been trained on digital systems. She went analog when the digital advantage disappeared, and she did it inside 40 minutes, and she did not stop moving for 17 consecutive hours, and I watched her drink 7 coffees in that time, and I now understand in my bones what Sergeant Okonkwo meant when she said coffee was not a mild stimulant. Webb's team, finding their communications advantage removed, shifted tactics 3 more times. I documented each shift, each one built on the previous command team response. They were not executing a plan. They were responding, rotating, finding the next edge. At hour 41, Featherstone's redesigned tracking protocol caught 2 members of Webb's team in the eastern sector. She did not move on them immediately. She waited 8 hours. When the rest of Webb's team converged to extract their pinned members, expecting the command team to be unaware, Featherstone's countermove was already in place. I watched Webb get killed in a simulated ambush at hour 49. He stood up out of it. Mark himself eliminated. Looked at the position of the command team's assets. Then he laughed. Not a short laugh. A real one. Long enough that the junior officer next to me in the monitoring station made a note that said, "Red Cell Leader seems pleased to lose," and looked at me like I had an explanation. I did not have an explanation. I wrote it down anyway. The after-action review lasted 3 hours. Both teams in the same room. I was allowed to observe. I sat in the corner with my notebook and my 5th coffee of the day, and I did not say anything because I had learned that if I asked questions in after-action reviews, the humans would answer them at great length, and I would need more notebooks. Webb and Featherstone sat across the table from each other and went through the exercise beat by beat. No defensiveness that I could identify. No posturing. They corrected each other, agreed, disagreed, corrected each other again. At one point, Webb said, "The retry protocol you built in hour 2 was the best piece of adaptive work I've seen in this cycle." Featherstone said, "You found a rules gap and weaponized it in 12 hours of prep time." I had no counter to that. "You found one," Webb said. "Eventually. That's the job," he said. I wrote that down. That's the job. I was not sure what to do with it. It was too small to be a philosophy. Too consistent to be a deflection. It was just a thing he said. The way he said things like falling was part of walking and loss was part of getting better, and neither of them required drama. Sergeant Okonkwo was standing near the door when the review ended. "You look confused," she said when I came out. "I'm trying to understand the emotional utility of finding satisfaction in a loss," I said. She thought about that. "You ever get better at something by winning?" I started to answer. She handed me another coffee. I took it. I filed part 2 of my report 9 days later, after I had reviewed all 7 appendices, cross-referenced them against every military behavioral study in the Galactic Core database, and come up empty in ways that felt almost personal. I titled the report, "On the Pedagogical Value of Design Failure." High Command sent it back. They said they already had a study on design failure. I asked what it concluded. They said it concluded that design failure was counterproductive and eroded unit cohesion. I looked at my footage of Webb and Featherstone in the same room, laughing at the same moment, building something between them out of a shared experience of losing. I sent back one line. "I respectfully suggest you update the study." They did not respond. I took that as a win. I was learning. I have been keeping a list. This was not something I planned to do. It started in Cycle 3 as a professional habit. Small observations too minor to file, too persistent to ignore, and it has grown over 19 rotations into something I cannot technically call a document because it does not follow any format the Corps recognizes. It is a list of small things. Private. I will excerpt it here because this is the final report, and I have decided that accuracy matters more than looking like I had everything under control. Cycle 4. Trainee Osei baked a cake in the barracks kitchen for a teammate's birthday. The teammate did not know it was their birthday because they had lost track of the date. It was a brief argument. They ate the cake anyway. I do not know what this tells me about humans. I know it tells me something. Cycle 7. Sergeant Okonkwo let me keep my 3rd notebook when I filled the 2nd one. She had a 4th already waiting. I did not ask her how she knew I would need it. She had known I would need it. Cycle 12. Trainee Webb ran 3 kilometers on a stress fracture before a medic caught him. When asked why he didn't report it, he said, "I didn't want to miss the exercise." When asked what exercise was so important it was worth potentially ending his military career on, he said, "It wasn't important. I just didn't want to miss it." I have thought about this a great deal. Cycle 15. I ran out of coffee at 0300 and could not sleep. I went to the monitoring station. Sergeant Okonkwo was there. She handed me a cup without turning around. She had heard my footsteps in the hall. She had recognized them. I filed this nowhere. I'm not sure why. The final exercise of Rotation 1 is called Index Full. They do not give it a creative name. The name is the description. End exercise, full spectrum. Everything learned, all at once, live evaluation, no safety net other than the ones built into the system and the ones the trainees have built into each other. I requested permission to observe from inside the operational area. High Command said no. Sergeant Okonkwo said, I'll put you in as a non-combatant embedded observer. You wear the vest. You stay with me. High Command said no again. We were inside the operational area by 0540. I want to be clear that Sergeant Okonkwo made this decision unilaterally, and I only agreed because I had been at Fort Halcyon long enough to understand that embedded observer was not a combat role, and that my refusal would be a form of cowardice, and Sergeant Okonkwo would not say this, but she would know it. She would know it because I would know it. That was new. That was Cycle 18 new. I filed it in the private list. The exercise area was dense forest on the western edge of the base. The kind of forest that smells like cold dirt and something I've come to associate involuntarily with the first 3 weeks of my posting here when I still thought I understood what I was watching when everything felt like data. I was wearing a reflective vest marked in no incombatant in 4 languages. The humans occasionally glanced at me the way you glance at furniture in a room you're moving through fast. I had, at some point, become furniture. This was not an insult. Furniture gets to watch. Webb's team was Blue Force this time. His call sign was Granite. I do not know if he chose it. It suited him. The exercise had been running for 6 hours when I started to understand that something had gone wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Wrong in the quiet way of a plan, encountering a plan that did not account for the first plan. The opposing force had a new element. A second-year trainee who had been transferred into the exercise specifically to introduce an unfamiliar variable. Someone Webb's team had never worked against. Someone who did not do what doctrine said. Her call sign was Sable. She was 22 years old, and she moved through the forest like she had grown up in it. She had, as it turned out. The briefing notes I had been given mentioned, in passing, that she had spent her adolescence in woodland terrain and had applied to the academy directly out of rural secondary school. The briefing notes mentioned this as biographical color. She was using a movement pattern I could not find in any training manual in the Corps archive. Not because it was classified, because she had invented it. Out of childhood, out of knowing specific trees. Webb's forward element walked into her ambush at hour 7. Clean. Complete. 3 of his 5 forward personnel compromised. The exercise controller marked them eliminated. Webb was 300 meters back. He had heard it. No radio contact. Just heard it. The sound, or the absence of sound, or the specific quality of silence that replaces noise when something has gone wrong. I know this because I was watching, and I watched him stop moving for approximately 4 seconds in a way that was different from his other stops. He goes very still when he's thinking. Most humans move when they're anxious. Webb goes still. I had identified this in Cycle 5 and noted it in the wrong section of my report and never moved the note. For seconds. Then, he started moving again. Differently. What followed is an Appendix H through Appendix M, in full detail, with timestamps. I will give the version that matters. Webb did not have enough people. He knew he did not have enough people. He did not. And here's the thing. Here's the thing I keep returning to in my private list and in my notebooks and in the long quiet after I've finished my coffee, and I'm just sitting with it. He did not act as though he did not have enough people. He used his remaining 2 forward personnel as an information system rather than a force. They moved, reported, moved again. He was building a picture of Sable's position not through engagement, but through what she didn't engage with. He was reading her hesitation, finding her edges. And simultaneously, this is the part 1, keep rereading. Simultaneously, he was calling in his logistics personnel, not his fighters, his logistics. The 3 trainees responsible for supply and equipment who had never fired a simulated weapon in this exercise, who were technically non-combatant within the exercise's internal structure, who were, let me be precise, the last people anyone expected to be relevant at hour 8 of a compromised tactical operation. He called them in. He talked to them for 7 minutes. Then, he did something I had not anticipated, which is meaningful because by cycle 18, I had developed a reasonably functional model of how Webb made decisions. He stepped back. He gave the plan to his logistics lead, a trainee named Barros who smelled perpetually of the synthetic lubricant they used on equipment and who had spent 6 cycles being very good at an invisible job. And he said, "This is yours." Barros looked at him. "I'll create the distraction," Webb said. "You run the play." Barros ran the play. I will not reproduce the tactical details because they are in the appendix and because they involve a sequence of equipment positioning and movement patterns that, typed out, reads like a mistake and executed, looked like something so specific to the people executing it that it could not have come from a manual. It came from 6 months of Barros doing an invisible job and knowing exactly how every piece of gear moved and how much noise it made and what position Sable's team would be watching. Sable's team was watching all the wrong things. The exercise ended at hour 9. Webb's Blue Force, operating at 60% capacity, with a non-combat element running the primary maneuver, 1. The exercise controller stood in the middle of the forest and said, "Full stop," and then did not say anything else for a moment that felt long even to me. I found Webb after the debrief. He was sitting on a log at the edge of the tree line, eating something out of a small packet that smelled wrong in a way that I had stopped asking about in Cycle 8. I sat down next to him. "Why Barros?" I asked. He looked at me. Not surprised I was there. Not surprised by the question. He'd gotten used to my questions around Cycle 6. At the same time, I'd gotten used to the coffee. "Because Barros knew something I didn't," he said. "About the gear. About the ground. About how to move it. You could have directed him." "I could have tried," he said. "Wouldn't have been the same." I thought about that. "You gave up control of your own plan. Gave up the parts one was worse at," he said. "Kept the parts one was better at." He offered me something from the packet. I declined. He shrugged. "You're going home soon?" he said. "End of the cycle," I said. He nodded. "Learn what you needed." I looked at the tree line. The forest had that post-exercise quality. Too quiet, full of the memory of movement that had already stopped. "I don't know yet," I said. "I think I need to look at it from further away." He nodded again, like that was a reasonable answer. "The coffee helps," he said. "With looking at things from further away?" "With everything," he said. "I left Fort Halcyon on a Thursday." I mention this because I know what a Thursday is now. It is slightly better than a Tuesday. Not significantly, but slightly. Sergeant Okonkwo walked me to the gate. She did not say much. She had, over 19 rotations, gotten better at not saying things that didn't need saying, or she had always been good at it, and I had only recently learned to notice. At the gate, she handed me a thermos. Full. Sealed. Something dark and bitter inside that had kept its heat. "For the journey," she said. I looked at it for a moment. "This is not standard issue," I said. "No," she said. "You brought this from somewhere." "Yes." I looked at her. She looked at me. The gate was open behind her. "Thank you," I said, which I had learned at Fort Halcyon was sometimes the only thing that fit. She nodded. She turned around and walked back toward the training grounds without looking back. I went through the gate. High Command reviewed my final report in 3 days. They sent back one question. "What is your primary strategic recommendation following 19 rotations of observation?" I sat with this question for a long time. I looked at my notebooks, 5 of them now, a 6th one started and half full. I looked at the thermos, which I had kept on my desk, because it was a specific kind of useful that I did not want to misplace. I looked at the private list. Trainee Osei's cake. Sergeant Okonkwo's footstep recognition. Barros running a play. He was given 7 minutes to prepare. Webb still for 4 seconds and then moving. I wrote my recommendation. It was 3 sentences long. Do not attempt to replicate what the human military academy produces. Replication requires understanding the system. The system is not the point. The people are the point, and the people are made of something that does not reduce to a system. My recommendation is to remain humble and continue observing. I am available for reassignment. High Command sent back. That's 5 sentences. I sent back. Noted. They reassigned me. To Fort Halcyon. 2nd rotation. I packed the thermos first.